It was a historically bad result for the Liberal Party, by which I mean we have to go back to before there was a Liberal Party to find a time when the right wing of Australian politics has done as badly as it did.
One for Mum, one for Dad, and one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian.
Budgets are about choices, Fran, and you show what you value through the choices you make.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared. The Treasurer knows.
I want an economy that works for people, not the other way around.
We'll just end up being a third-rate economy, a banana republic.
Just follow the money.
G'day and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast that explains economics, politics and policy in plain English. I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Australia Institute. Well, the polls suggested that a Labor win was likely, but even the truest of true believers are unlikely to have imagined a night like election night this year.
Today, the Australian people have voted for Australian values.
It's still sinking in, David. I mean, this was beyond even our most optimistic expectations.
Tonight's not the night that we wanted for the Liberal Party or for our coalition or indeed for our country.
A short time ago, I called the Labor candidate for Melbourne, Sarah Whitty, to concede, to congratulate her and to wish her all the best as the next member for Melbourne.
Coalition has run, without a doubt, the worst campaign in living memory. I wouldn't want to be part of that post-mortem. Good luck.
The Albanese government was re-elected with a massive 94 lower house seats, unseating opposition leader Peter Dutton and Greens leader Adam Bandt in the process. It was a stunning win for Labor, but a closer look at the results shows that Australians' political preferences are changing. Joining me today to dig a little deeper into the election result and what it might mean for the new parliament is Australia Institute Director of Democracy and Accountability, Bill Browne. G'day, Bill.
Good afternoon, Eb.
So, Bill, let's start with this massive Labor lower house majority. Just how big was this win in terms of, the historical context?
This was a huge win for the Labor government, both in terms of the seat count and what we call the two-party preferred vote. So 94 seats puts Albanese on par with John Howard in 1996 in his first win as Prime Minister. But what sets Albanese apart from Howard is that this is Albanese's second term in government. It's not surprising that a party sweeps into power with a landslide victory. But what we've previously seen in Australia is that a government loses ground in its second election. Contrary to what we'd expect, contrary to popular wisdom, Albanese actually increased his majority. And when you look at it in two-party preferred terms, so that's just whether people preferred their Labor candidate or their Liberal or National candidate, Albanese's win looks even better. The Labor Party has not done as well in two-party preferred terms as it did at this election.
Wow, so it really was kind of across the board. But how does that huge majority and its kind of big two-party preferred advantage compare with Labor's primary vote, for example?
That gets quite interesting. So the primary vote or first preference vote, someone puts one Labor, that's a primary vote. And what we see is that Labor gets less than 35%, so about 1 in 3 of the primary votes of Australians at this election. That's not generally an election-winning primary vote.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a 94-seat majority primary vote, is it?
No, well, to give you an example, back in 2010, Julia Gillard, Tony Abbott, the Labor Party won 38% of the primary vote, and that's when we get them neck and neck with the Liberals on seat count, neck and neck in two-party preferred terms.
Okay, so that seems like a pretty big discrepancy. What explains the massive difference in the actual result when it comes to seats?
So there's two elements at work here, and the first is that in our majoritarian system, so lower house representatives, they're a single local member for an electorate. And whether you win that electorate by a lot or a little, you've got one local member. That means that a party can accumulate a lot of seats if it wins narrowly in many different places. And the other element to Labor's victory is the preferences. So while they got a low primary vote, they were overwhelmingly supported by voters that didn't vote for Liberals, didn't vote for Nationals, and didn't vote for Labor. But it's certainly not out of the ordinary to see single-member electorates return these kinds of results. In the United Kingdom last year, the Labor Party there got 33.7% of the vote, less than Albanese got here, and they got 63% of the seats, more than Albanese got here. That's exacerbated by their first past the post system.
I was going to say, so they don't have preferential voting, do they? It's just whoever gets the most votes gets across the line.
That's right. And what that means is we can't say with confidence who the preferred candidate was among most voters in UK electorates. That's quite distinct from Australia, where we can tell you in 100 or so seats, the Labor candidate was preferred to the Liberal or National candidate.
So I guess the key difference there is obviously, maybe you don't put the Labor Party first, but in a choice between them and the coalition, there's a whole cohort of voters that prefer Labor over the coalition.
Exactly.
I guess now if we're thinking about the role that preferences played in this election, is it generally speaking enough for one of the major parties to just be less unpopular than the other?
That can certainly help in terms of winning preferences. And in this election, there was a clear choice, at least in terms of personality, between the kind of leader that Albanese presented himself and the kind of leader that Peter Dutton presented himself as. And I think that choice was probably on the mind of many voters, even those who didn't vote Labor or Liberal. But there's certainly something that's lost to a party when it loses primary vote. In simple monetary terms, our public funding is based on primary vote. But I think more than that, politicians depend not just on winning the vote once every 3 years, but in being able to take the Australian people with them and to be able to build a coalition of consensus behind themselves. That can get harder if you're winning a smaller share of the vote. Of course, also, if the non-major party vote gets high enough, then Greens and Independents and One Nation and so on can start winning seats in their own right. And
also based on preferences.
Also relying on preferences.
Yeah.
Exactly right. And then at the Senate, voting there is proportional. So again, there, how many senators you have, who you have to work with to get legislation passed is going to depend on roughly your primary vote there.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to preferences, how much effort do parties put into trying to secure that second preference, I guess?
It's an interesting area because almost all parties and indeed many independent candidates will issue how to vote cards, which will recommend how you should be preferencing according to that party and its negotiations with others. Those are completely voluntary for voters. And more than that, they actually depend on you getting those how to vote cards into the hands of voters. We saw a lot of talk about One Nation and the Liberal Party doing a preference deal, which was out of the ordinary because, of course, John Howard set the precedent of putting One Nation last. But some of the value in that preference deal was probably in terms of signalling. The Liberal Party saying it was more amenable to One Nation than it used to be, and One Nation likewise pointing to its supporters that the Liberal Party had changed tack. Because One Nation, to get those votes into the hands of voters, would probably need a larger how to vote handing out operation than they actually had. Another element, of course, is voters are free to exercise their own free will. Not every voter follows their party how to vote, even if they see it. And indeed, in some community independent campaigns, we see the Greens' strong preferencing of the Labor Party, despite the Greens' how to vote card, potentially making the difference in electorates like Bean and Fremantle.
Okay. So I guess that makes me think about the whole two-party prism through which a lot of politics, that's kind of the lens that people look at it. Is that kind of past its use-by date now?
I think it's relied on too much by people to understand what we're seeing in Australia. We see this historically large vote for minor parties and independents, exceeding the vote for the Liberal National Coalition, supposedly the alternative government in Australia. We see them increasingly winning seats, but it's been the case in the Senate almost, with small interruptions for decades, that no single party has had a majority there. So to some extent, it's our myopic focus on just half of the Parliament of Australia that leads us to think of a two-party system for Australia at all. I think we are seeing a shift, though, also in the ability of third parties to set the political agenda. And I'd point to Tasmania as an example of this. Tasmania later this month's heading to an election in which salmon industry and the AFL stadium, logging and so on are all election issues, even though the two major parties are basically agreed on those positions. That's something that can only happen because there's a strong third party, a strong independent push in that state that raises the salience of different issues.
So you pointed out something interesting about the leaders of the three major parties in this election. What did you notice about Anthony Albanese, Susan Ley and David Littleproud and how they won their seats?
What's interesting is that all three of the major party leaders defended their seats against a runner-up who wasn't from the other major party.
Oh.
So the closest challenger for Albanese in Grayndler was a Green. The closest challenger for Susan Lee in Farrer was an independent. And for David Littleproud in Maranoa, the closest challenger was a One Nation candidate. So in terms of just a measure of how independent and minor party campaigns have grown, it's the fact that we now have major party leaders who are fending off challengers from these minor parties and independents.
Incredible ones.
So let's be honest and upfront about last month's election. We didn't just lose. We got smashed. Totally smashed. What we as the Liberal Party presented to the Australian people was comprehensively rejected. The scale of that defeat, its size and significance is not lost on me nor any one of my parliamentary team sitting here today.
So I guess we know that it was a pretty bad result for the Liberal National Coalition overall, but really, Bill, how bad was it?
It was a historically bad result for the Liberal Party, by which I mean we have to go back to before there was a Liberal Party to find a time when the right wing of Australian politics has done as badly as it did.
Is that right? That's a long time.
That is a long time. In fact, it's 1943, at the time at which the Labor government won almost half of the primary vote in its own right. And this causes a crisis of confidence for the United Australia Party, which is the predecessor to the Liberal Party. And this is occurring during a world war with those patriotic effects and just 2 years after a United Australia Party government collapsed. So all the conditions there for a thumping Labor victory. And what we see is the United Australia Party did some serious rethinking at the time. Robert Gordon Menzies goes away. He talks to a whole bunch of conservative groups out in the community. The Institute of Public Affairs, probably Australia's first think tank, is founded to give intellectual leadership to what becomes the Liberal Party. And Menzies very consciously cast the Liberal Party in a more moderate vein, choosing liberalism, not conservatism, as its guiding principle. The Liberal Party today, its vote share looks about what the 1943 vote share looked like. But it's also lost the majority of its blue ribbon seats, those seats that have been held by the Liberal Party, in some cases since federation, since the country began, since Parliament first sat. And those are the seats of Menzies himself, of Tony Abbott, Malcolm Turnbull, John Howard, Harold Holt, John Hewson, Brendan Nelson, Alexander Downer.
That's an indictment kind of a list, isn't it?
That is almost all of the leadership of the Liberal Party and some of the National Party as well, since World War II. And it's difficult to see exactly where the Liberal Party finds that kind of renewal now, with the loss of those blue ribbon seats, out of government at the state level in most places, and with a declining number of party members as well, who you might otherwise expect to be the rank and file grassroots revitalisation of the party.
And I mean, I know there's a review, but is there any serious moves afoot for that kind of a back to the drawing board, where did we go wrong style thing that the Liberal Party did after that initial election loss back in the 1940s?
I haven't seen much evidence of it yet. It's still early days. But for example, the fact that Susan Lee describes herself as agnostic on how you achieve more women's representation in the Liberal Party, even if she's a zealot on getting more of it, it doesn't give much confidence that there's a plan for actually getting the Liberal Party back into contention. The one caveat, of course, is that political scientists have predicted 10 of the last 3 collapses of the major party system. So there's certainly, none of this is set in stone. The opportunity for renewal and revitalisation is there.
And John Howard always described the Liberal Party as a broad church. I mean, does that still hold true now that they've lost most of their blue ribbon seats? Who is actually left in the parliament for the Liberal Party now?
The Australia Institute looked at those classic blue ribbon seats, so held for a long time and often fairly safe for the party. And few of them remain, and almost none of them remain within the inner cities, which is where a lot of the new leaders for the Liberal Party were cultivated in earlier times. Indeed, the opposition leader's own seat of Farrer looks more like a National Party blue ribbon seat than it does the Liberal Party blue ribbons of old. That suggests, I guess, one opportunity for the Liberal Party could be to recast itself more intentionally as a regional and rural party, but that would be further away from Menzies' vision of the party as representing artisans, shopkeepers, as well as farmers. And indeed, he quite deliberately talked to a middle class of Australia that even in the 40s wasn't necessarily working with their hands, but was working in professional work.
I want to turn now to the kind of independents and minor parties. The Greens obviously unexpectedly lost their leader, Adam Bennett, but how did they go overall?
Look, I think at the outset, in an election where a party loses 3 of its 4 lower house seats, that's not a good result for the Greens. But it's striking that their overall vote across the country barely changes at all. So the votes that they lost in the seats that they held were made up for by votes won elsewhere in the country. I think that means that any unpacking of what the Greens did wrong, what they need to do next time, has to be based on the idea that Australians as a whole were as supportive of the Greens as they were at the last election. And indeed, even the result that they got is an improvement on elections prior to that. But that the way that the Greens vote was distributed went badly for them in terms of winning those lower house seats.
And were they also harmed by the Liberal vote essentially tanking this election? Like if we're talking about these seats coming down to preferences, sometimes that comes down to who gets knocked out of the count first kind of thing. Were they a victim of kind of, by proxy, the very poor Liberal result?
Yeah, I think both Greens and Independents, when they're running against the Labor Party, depending on exactly how it pans out, but often suffer from a fall in the Liberal Party vote. The Greens also suffered from a change in Liberal preferencing strategy. So actually Liberal voters are often quite good at following the Liberal Party suggestion for how to vote. And sometimes the Liberals want to make trouble for Labor by preferencing Greens, and sometimes they take an ideological position and say they don't want Greens in Parliament.
Yeah.
And that too can make a serious difference to whether the Greens remain in contention.
I don't think any seat in Australia is safe anymore.
First woman to win Bradfield, first independent after being a Liberal seat for 75 years. What does this moment mean?
It's an extreme honour, and I think people in the electorate have voted. I know it's 26 votes, but they are really looking forward to better representation.
Many thought that this was just going to be this was just a reaction against Scott Morrison. I think that narrative is dead.
So the last election in 2022 was really, obviously it was a huge climate election, it was a huge election for integrity, and it was a huge election for the so-called Teals, community independents running in those blue ribbon seats who kind of cared about climate change and integrity in those issues. But this crossbench is smaller in this new parliament. What does that suggest about the move away from the major parties to minor parties and independents?
Well, the first thing I'd note is that the community independents on net held their seats, which wasn't guaranteed going in. Because, of course, one of the elements for the independents' success last election was Scott Morrison as Prime Minister, 9 years of Liberal national government. And I think there was a real theory there that you could propose that as a backlash to Scott Morrison, the community independents would have been a one-time thing. On the contrary, the community independents lost one seat, Goldstein, but they won one seat, Bradfield. They lost another seat, North Sydney, but due to redistributions, not due to a change in popular vote.
Yeah.
So I think it to some extent, the community independents were a victim of high expectations that we think holding their own is a bad result in an election in which the Liberal Party has suffered terribly.
Yeah.
But also looking at some of the fundamentals, we see a strong case for independents, not all of them community independents, but among them community independents, to run competitive campaigns at the next election. The minor party and independent vote is higher than ever. It's exceeded the Liberal national vote for the first time in history. And what that's led to is more seats where the crossbench candidate comes runner-up. Now, once you're in runner-up, you're well placed to pick up seats at the next election. So fewer gold medals, if we use that analogy, but more silver medals than last time.
And overall, Bill, there hasn't been, as you said, much focus on the Senate, but that is where most legislation is decided. What does the Senate picture look like?
The Senate picture looks good for both Labor and the Greens. So indeed, the Greens had their equal best result in the Senate, and Labor picked up a bunch of seats in contests that we normally expect to split 50-50 left-wing and right-wing seats, which means that together, Labor and the Greens will be able to pass laws through the Senate or other motions without any other votes, without the Liberal Party, without the independents. So we've seen David Pocock, Jackie Lambie in the last term play that role of kingmaker. In this term of Parliament, if the Liberals say no, it'll only be the Greens deciding whether or not laws pass. That's probably good for the Labor government because it means fewer people to negotiate with, but it's probably also good for the Greens because they'll know everything going into negotiations. They won't be able to be played off against others in contention as well.
Yeah, right. Any other observations about this election compared to previous ones, Bill?
This election result in Australia is really a testament to the very good electoral system that we have. The fact that you can have a major party winning a fairly small amount of first preference votes, but turning that into a win because of its deep but buried support among other voters is a feature of our full preferential voting system. I know that it can be time-consuming to go into the election booth and number every single box, but the effect of doing that is that your vote stays in the count at each stage, and it means that what you think of the final two candidates is taken into account. You can't waste your vote. The benefits of tactical voting are fairly limited in Australia. You can vote pretty sincerely according to your wishes and be confident that your vote is going to count in that process. that sets Australia apart from other jurisdictions. And while I think as that non-major party vote grows, the case for proportional representation gets better and better, I don't think we should let that distract from the fact that full preferential voting is an Australian innovation that works to make elections fair.
And representative, like the fact that even if your candidate doesn't get elected, that your preference one way or the other for whoever's like left in the count, yeah, as you say, it means your vote is never wasted and you still get a say, even if your candidate doesn't get up, which is obviously not the case in places like the United States, where voting for a third-party candidate could essentially scupper your preferred major party from getting in. So yeah, it's got a lot of virtues.
It does.
Well, thanks for joining me today, Bill.
Thanks for having me, Eb.
You can find our research looking at the 2025 election results and much more on our website at australiainstitute.org.au or via the link in the show notes. This episode was recorded on Tuesday, the 1st of July, and some things may have changed since recording. I want to sincerely thank each and every person who contributed to the Australia Institute's End of Financial Year campaign. We very much appreciate the support. Our theme music is by Jonathan McFeet from Pulse and Thrum, with additional music from Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Ebony Bennett. Thanks for listening.